Is your debt causing you sleepless nights? Knock your debt out with Debt KO. And your debt won't be the only thing keeping you up at night. Debt KO, free, impartial advice on all your debt.
Oscar BEVIS, IFL TV MTK Global. Delighted to be joined by Mr. Jamie Moore in the Matchroom Residency. How are we, Jay?
I'm okay, thanks, mate.
Put the mic there and do that again. How are we, Jay?
Yeah, I'm alright, thanks, mate, yeah.
Disaster start. You've been in a lot of bubbles, haven't you? I feel like whether it be Queensbury, whether it be Matchroom, you're just a face in the bubble now.
Yeah, I think this is 8 I've done now. So quite a few, but don't get any easier.
It's been good for you though so far. Obviously, Jack Catterall's success, Carl Frampton's success, Mark Leach probably the performance since the boxing restart, the best performance, and Martin Murray crowning it off would make stunning 6 months for the gym.
Yeah, I mean, all year we've had I think we've had 8 or 9 out and with all wins. So it's been a successful year. Like you say, some good performances. Mark Leach's was a standout one. Chantel obviously winning a world title. So this would be the absolute icing on the cake if Martin can pull this one off.
I said to Martin, a lot of the build-up seems to have centred around, would you consider him retirement? When COVID kicked in, he said, I think he thought that his career might have been over, but you know, he's sort of defying the odds. I mean, people sometimes say their career could be over at 30. He's 38 and he's jumping into his 5th world title attempt, and really, he's not out of place doing so.
No, and you know, you look back 2.5 years ago when this fight was first muted and there was the problems, and you know, it got pulled twice, which was devastating for Martin at the time, and he was probably thinking at the time he's never going to get that type of opportunity again. But he carried on with his career, and he had a few just ticking over fights, and his words to me were, I'm not even looking for big fights now, I'm just going to get to the stage where I'm enjoying boxing and I'm doing it for the love of it, and he did that, and then because of that, you know, he's put no pressure on himself, and then out of the blues an opportunity's come. So maybe the fact that he thought it was never going to come will give him that sort of extra 5% or 10% what he might need down the stretch, knowing that this is an opportunity which he never thought he was going to get again.
It's weird because he said that what sort of got him the love of doing it again was doing PT sessions, teaching people boxing. So he sort of took on your role and then saw a different side to boxing.
Yeah, I mean, I've said this as well myself. Since I started, or since I retired really, and I was doing the work with Sky Sports and breaking fights down and analysing the reasons why we feel like a certain fight will beat another one, looking into it tactically, that sort of made me more aware of it, and I feel like me sort of boxing IQ improved because of that. And then definitely going into the coaching side of it, I feel like I would be a better fighter now if I could fight. And really, Martin's in that situation. You know, we're only 4 years apart. He's 4 years younger than me. So he's probably got the amount of experience what I've got, except he's still physically able to do it. And you know, he's in that situation where he's got the opportunity to do it. So there's a fine line between having all that experience and knowledge and being past it, or having that experience and knowledge and still being fresh enough. You know, he's been in tough fights, Martin, but there's been big gaps in between. But having said that, over the last 5 years, he's actually been more active than Billy Joe. He's had 9 fights, I think, and I think Billy Joe's had 5 or 6. So there is certain aspects which go in Martin's favour, and those are certainly one of them. Activity and experience is definitely there.
A lot of people will say, let's break it down and let's break it this way. If Billy gets into his rhythm, he's fluid, he'll outbox Martin, it will go 12. That's the end of it. But I know obviously you won't see it like that, Martin won't see it like that, and boxing's never that simple anyway. What sort of things have you put in place to, I know you don't want to give too much away, but I suppose if you can tell me what sort of things you put in place to prevent it from being what many people, I suppose, would see as a one-sided fight.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I'm not silly. I understand. You look at the records and activity, age, stuff like that. It suggests that Billy Joe Saunders wins it on points and wins it quite handily. But there's loads of different aspects what come into it, and one of them is certainly you can't sleep on Martin Murray. Not for one step of the imagination. he performs better the better the fighter is in with for a start. So, you know, you could look at his last few performances and say, yeah, he boxed quite well, but he was at a certain level. He always overperforms, Martin. He always performs better the better guys in with. Stylistically, even though Billy Joe is tough to pin down and nail, you know, fighters like that, you need to have a good ring IQ, good ring generalship. Your timing's got to be good. And Martin's got all those things. So although, yeah, Billy Joe could be a nightmare for anyone, it very well could be that Martin Murray is the type of fighter who's Billy Joe's Achilles heel, where they'll give him all those problems. And, you know, you look at one of Martin's best performances against Sergio Martinez. Sergio's got a real similar style to Billy Joe. You know, it's a southpaw, he's very fluid, good foot movement, but you have to put things into place so that, which are never easy, by the way, but you have to put things into place where you try and draw your opponent into making mistakes so that you can capitalise on them. You know, I've no doubt Martin Murray will be able to get Billy Joe into positions where he can then capitalise on them. He's making sure he capitalises on them, and that's the problem. That's the problem you've got. You've got to make sure that when you get into that situation, you pull the trigger and you make him pay for it. So is Martin young enough and fresh enough to do that? I believe he is, because I've watched him do it week in, week out in sparring, but we'll never know until on the night.
You talk about sparring, and I would have liked to just sit down with Martin and probably get stuff out of him that I know he'll probably tell when he's retired, but he said fighting behind closed doors, he's been in gyms before where it's just been you, him, Oliver back in the day and someone else, and it's been toe-to-toe. It's been like a fight, but it's been an empty gym. So he feels like he knows that environment. I'd love to know what sort of stories there are from that, but yeah, he said he sort of knows that environment a little bit.
The last time I ever sparred in sort of a proper situation was before my last fight, and it was in a situation where Oliver, so me and Martin never sparred for about 12 months properly before this, because it got to the point where it was so competitive, we was literally knocking shit out of each other. But I needed one last tough spar before my last fight, and Oliver said, come down to the gym on your own. I don't want anyone else there, because I don't want it to become you're doing it because people are watching. And I tell you what, it was the most horrendous 8-round sparring I've ever had. And it was obvious to me at that point in time, I'm past my best and I should be retired. But I understand what Martin's saying. You know, we've been in them situations, but I'm not saying Billy Joe's not, or no other fighter I've been, but a lot of the time, there's music on, there's another 10, 15 people in the gym, there's always an atmosphere. We've been in them situations on purpose where there's just nothing, no other distractions except the sparring, and you have to motivate yourself. So you know, there's going to be other factors what come into play. And it is a difficult situation when you're the only voice, or you know, the two cornermen are the only voices what you can hear, because there's positives and negatives to that. Your opponent gets to know what you're asking your fighter to do. But I've been in this situation 8 times now, and I feel like I've picked up a bit of experience and sort of a few little tricks up my sleeve where I can use that to my advantage. So we'll show you them on Friday.
Saturday's events, we can start with Jack Catterall, and we're going to actually start with some Josh Taylor comments. He tweeted there's levels to this game and I'll show them levels or something along those lines, but Jack got the win, and I think Jack looked pretty good at the same time. I'm pleased with Jack's performance, and can you sort of respond, I suppose, to Josh's comments?
Listen, I get it from Josh's point of view. I always feel like Jack, again, will perform better the better guy he's in with. That guy the other night was very negative. He was a counter puncher, so it's difficult for a southpaw who's a counter puncher by nature to look good against someone like that. But he forced the fight more, so he took himself out of his comfort zone for a start, which is never an easy thing to do. Again, the situation with no crowd and stuff, where maybe you need Gene up a little bit more, that wasn't ideal. But he got the win. It was solid, good, solid win. And Josh Taylor has proven himself to be above, you know, head and shoulders above everyone else at this moment in time. Jack Catterall's not got that opportunity yet to prove that. So I understand, you know, Josh is gonna sort of have confidence in himself, and rightly so. But until he gets in there with Jack, you know, I think a lot of people underestimate Jack, because sometimes he's he looks like he's being flat-footed and he's sat around doing nothing. But you've got to ask yourself the question, why is his opponent not doing anything? Once you're in there with him, he's much harder to navigate, he's much harder to pin down. He hits a lot harder than you expect. So we know Josh Taylor's the best guy in the division at the moment. We're under no illusions, got a lot of respect for him. And it wasn't an easy decision for Jack to step aside and allow the Ramirez fight to happen. But we're confident that Josh will win it. And that then means that fight between those two guys, two British guys for all 4 belts, is a bigger fight. So from our point of view, Jack fighting Josh Taylor as undisputed champion is a bigger fight than Jack fighting Ramirez for 1 belt. So it wasn't an easy decision, but we're praying and hoping that Josh comes through it, and then there's a big all-British fight.
Is the time in there that Jack's next fight could be the winner of Josh Taylor and Jose Ramirez? Is that the timing, or will it be one more? Because if there is that one more, what sort of opponent do you look for again? Because you don't want to go down the line of looking for opponents that aren't too risky but aren't going to challenge Jack as well.
Yeah, I think we're pretty confident that Josh and Ramirez are going to box early next year, so January or February, and then I'm guessing Josh would like a homecoming, so Edinburgh sort of type fight in the summer, May or June, and then so we wouldn't take that risk. What's the point? We've done our part. Jack's got a bit of money for Christmas. He's got a baby on the way. He's got a new house, so he's okay in that sense, and he can afford now to just keep himself active in the gym, take over, help the other lads out, keep himself busy, and then when that fight presents itself, then be ready to go.
I'm telling you, Josh Taylor, Jack Catterall, the belts, Edinburgh Castle, please. The main event. Now, before we talk about the actual in-ring stuff, I just want to come to Daniel Dubois, sort of the aftermath. Carl immediately sort of put out there on the punditry panel that he felt Dubois quit. He got quite a lot of criticism online, and then we learnt of his injury, and people seem to lay off a little bit. Just can I ask you what sort of standpoint you take, Jamie?
Well, you can't get away from facts. And I don't like using that word. And I think if you say someone quit or stop the fight, or if you call someone a quitter, I mean, it's a tough it's a real fine line to go on. But did Daniel Dubois take a knee and watch the ref count him out to 10? He did. So therefore, he quit. So you can't get away from that fact. But what is the reason behind him quitting? Now, I don't believe he quit because he's not brave and he's not a fighter by heart, because you don't get to that stage and that level without having something about you. But I also think you can teach yourself or learn to be braver, because with reflection. So, that would have been a painful eye injury. And I read that his corner was looking at pulling him out at the end of that round. So, if he'd have had an inclination that his corner might have pulled him out at the end of the round, he might have just sat it through and got through that round. But it's a tough one, because where do you draw the line? Do you draw the line at someone who's potentially got a real serious injury? Fighters don't quit. They need people around them. The referee's there for a reason. The doctors are ringside for a reason. Your cornerman's there for a reason to protect you. I did it with Tommy, for instance. Tommy Coyle would never quit in a fight, but I know him. I know him inside out, and even though I knew he would never quit, and I could tell by his body language, he was finished. He'd had enough. His opportunity to win that fight against Algeria was gone. So what was the point in him being there? And when I said to him, "Listen, that's it. You're done. You're finished. I'm pulling you out," he still argued back, even though I'm pretty confident in his mind he was thinking, I can't win this fight, what's the point in being here, but I'll never quit. So sometimes a fighter needs saving for the self. And he got to the point, Daniel, where he made that decision himself. So if his corner was going to pull him out at the end of the round, then brilliant, fair play to you. But I've got a feeling that this, in the long run, will make Daniel Dubois a better fighter. He'll learn from it. I think he'll learn a lot about himself. And I feel like he panicked more than anything. He panicked because he'd never been in that situation before, and matching people with stiffer opposition early on in the career goes a long way to teaching you those lessons before you're in there really in the deep end against someone like Joyce.
You feel like he was in the situation that you just mentioned with Tommy, where the fight at that stage was unwinnable? I mean, always hear about Daniel's power and how he's got these highlight reel KOs, spinning people's heads 360, whatever. Do you feel like he was at a situation where he couldn't win the fight then?
Well, he's never been in a situation where he's that deep into a fight.
Well, sorry, actually, I'll say that. He was up on the scorecards, but the general consensus is that he was losing the fight, so I'm not sure what his corner would have been feeling.
No, and the pattern of the fight was going against him. So he sort of, I felt, you know, and in fact, I've not even watched the fight, but I've seen highlights of it, and from what I can gather, he sort of had the better of the early rounds, but then as it went on, he was landing big right hands, but Joyce was riding him, and the pattern of the fight then started to go, well, he's getting a bit tired. The stuff he was sort of saying in between rounds would suggest that he was panicking a little bit. In fact, I mentioned this earlier on to somebody else about Aqib Fiaz. He's just done his first 8-rounder after only doing 1 6-rounder against Kane Baker, who everyone expected to give him a tough fight, and he'd give him difficult rounds to navigate, but you wouldn't class them as tough rounds. But after 3 rounds in the fight, he started to panic a little bit, and I was sort of saying to him, listen, breathe, relax, calm down, you're fine. So navigating him through those sort of middle rounds, and then by the time he got to the end of the 6th round, he was fine. He could see the finishing line. He'd had a bit of opposition and a bit of fight back, and took a few shots, but he wasn't absolutely in the deep end. And so that's an example of giving a fighter experience enough to teach him some lessons, learn something about himself, what it's like to be in a toughish sort of few rounds or whatever, but then come through the other side of it, learn from it, and then take that into later on into different fights. So I don't feel Daniel Dubois had any of that sort of opposition in those sort of 12 fights or whatever he had before it to suggest that he learned anything from him to put him in a position that when he was in there with Joyce and he was getting hit back, the first jab he got hit with, you could sort of see it put him on his heels, and it was a surprise to him. So it wasn't, for me, it wasn't a physical aspect. It was more about fatigue, and mentally he fell apart, and then in time he'll sort of look back on that and go, you know what, I can do better than that, I can be stronger, I can learn from that, and it'll make him a better fighter.
Hopefully for Joe's sake as well, people can focus on his performance. Just a final word, would you like to see Joe Joyce in that rematch from the amateurs with Usyk? I mean, that's sort of the one that they're throwing about, I suppose. Is that something that you'd like to see for Joe next? You've
got to give his massive respect to Joe Joyce. Look at his record as a pro, the guys he's fought and the scalps he's got. He's 35, he can't hang around, so we've got to go straight in there. If he can get a fight with Usyk, who wouldn't want to watch that? He'd definitely revert back to his more natural style of applying that pressure and letting his hands go, which I feel would give Usyk nightmares. He's still new to the heavyweight division. Joyce is massive, big, strong guy, work rate phenomenal. So I feel like he'd give Usyk nightmares, yeah.
Brilliant, thanks Jay, and I'm sure we'll catch up with you after Friday night.
No worries, cheers, us.
Is your debt causing you sleepless nights? Knock your debt out with Debt KO. And your debt won't be the only thing keeping you up at night. Debt KO, free impartial advice on all your debt.